Solutions, which is a technology company that works with GIS asset management and Webbased solutions for government and private industry and transportation. He's been involved within URISA International for 20 years, a member for 20 years. He's also done quite a few things. Currently, he is immediate past president. He also is on the core committee of GIS Core and a certified instructor for the Leadership Academy and the annual workshops. So Alan's going to talk to us today about a couple of URISA initiatives that are there to help us assess the health of our GIS, plus help us to build our skills or the skills of our staffs in managing GIS.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to try to stand here and make sure that we get everything recorded so they can use this session later on the web. A little bit additional about myself here. I actually am the past president till the GIS Pro, and that's in October, and then I'm off the board. I need to do a 3-year stint is kind of how it works. The GIS Management Institute is probably been around now for 2.5 years, 3 years. It's as far as the trying to get it put together and what it all stands for. I'm not exactly sure why I'm in the enterprise architecture section, but we'll talk a little bit about enterprise architecture as we go through this. And I'll go through what the GIS Management Institute is and what they call the capability maturity model. These are some things that the Management Institute is going to be rolling out in hopefully a couple of months. It's going to go into beta this next month. So a little bit, just kind of laying the groundwork. The first thing I want to talk about is the geospatial revolution that's happened over the last 50 years. I mean, you've seen, and this is kind of why the Management Institute has come about. You know, what's happened in terms of enabling technology, the ability that GIS has really moved within a lot of the different systems that are out there in all kinds of different vertical markets. It's not just in GIS for geography's sake. It's in transportation. It's in healthcare. It's in emergency management. You can see it's moved into all these different technology spaces, and it's really turned into, and it's not just the other part about this too, is it's not just a tool anymore. You know, we make maps with GIS. It's part of our everyday, how we get around, right? It's on your phone. How do I navigate from here to there? It's within a lot of the different technologies that are there. So, the issue really comes down to is you look at, now that it's become this ubiquitous technology, who are the purveyors of the people that are bringing this information into all of our different ways that GIS is being used in these different tools, whether they be phones or navigation equipment, AVL technology. It's not necessarily GIS people, right? There's computer scientists. It's coming from all kinds of other disciplines. But there's still a need for some GIS and understanding of geography. And I know that when you deal in coordinate systems and things like this and local coordinate systems, that doesn't mean a lot to some folks that are not necessarily geographers, so to speak. How many people in the room are geographers or planning background? Okay, it's about half. The rest are engineers, environmentalists, that kind of stuff. Okay, so the idea is that, you know, the ability and what the Management Institute is trying to put together is what are our capabilities from a management perspective, as well as the personnel that are going to be building, can continue to build out these technologies into the future. What are their capabilities, and where do they need to, you know, improve education, improve the access to knowledge, best practices, and that sort of thing. That's really laying the groundwork. So we know that geospatial technology is a key tool. So I mentioned it's ubiquitous. You can see it across all kinds of industries, agriculture, academics. And it's, you know, the thing that we're really focusing on and what the Management Institute is trying to drive to is the analysis of return on investment. So we know GIS is in all of these different areas, but how do we understand and how can we quantify what it means, and what's the value of it? And that's something that we need to do as a profession, so that people understand. Yeah, you know, GIS, and it is absolutely a return on investment. How do we quantify it? So that's really where this is headed to in the future as well. So that's just some of the technologies. The funny thing is, I see this picture on here now that when we laid this out about Google Glass and all that stuff, and I think that's pretty well deprecated now. They've already moved out of that, and you're seeing Google Glass sold on eBay. They're like, yeah, that was a great idea. And then there are, there are all kinds of technologies and tools, and this was an interesting one. They just couldn't figure out how to place it out there. But there's all kinds of new technologies coming out with GIS as a major component within those hardware and software environments. And as I mentioned too, how do we get to understanding? And you can see that we've really moved past. Is there a return on investment with GIS? There absolutely is, but getting to a way that we can find the analysis procedure to get to the net benefits of GIS and how we quantify it. And that's a lot of the work that's been happening. And if you go to the Management Institute, there's also what they teach in Leadership Academy. As I mentioned yesterday, they're having Leadership Academy in Denver in June. There's a whole section on calculating ROI for GIS. And I think this is, I'm starting to see case studies come out and what the value is. How many, you think about it, how many maps a minute are we getting? How many returns? How many people are coming to get information and download data for GIS? Those kinds of things. You can start to get some sort of value, put the value proposition together. So what's going to happen in the next 50 years? Who knows? I mean, I think it's endless possibilities for geographic information systems inside of different types of tools, inside of different software technologies. I always get to now, if you think about it, everybody's down to the phone and the ability to get access to information that may have been previously something that you're getting off a mainframe computer, very large systems, big data, and now we're trying to get it down to this level, and caching information and all these kinds of things are going to come up. And how do I deal with disconnected from in the field, for instance, trying to collect asset information? How do I handle that in a disconnected mode? How much data can I put on one of these guys? That's the kind of types of things that are going to be coming up in the future for us to think about in the next 50 years of how we use GIS. So what I was trying to do here is lay the groundwork that this is, it's a growing industry. This is just showing King County, which is Seattle, the 4,600 discrete users in all these different divisions that you can look at here. You mentioned some animal control. I mean, you just don't think about this stuff, right? I thought there was one that somebody was telling me the other day. Well, the guys who are going out and doing meter reading and all this kind of stuff, they want to know where the animals are at and which ones are potentially problem animals as they're going to get eaten alive as they're going out there reading meters and stuff like that. But it's a GIS question. It's a parcels. Where are these things occurring? Wireless technology you see here in that division. I'm just mention some of them. So you have a sheriff's department, airports, elections. It's just across the board. I mean, it's applicable. It's just like a data. You think about it, it's just a database, and then turning it into the spatial component of that database. It's applicable across all these different vertical areas. So we're looking at building our GIS programs and what we're doing in terms of our personnel and resources. So, how do we measure the effectiveness of what we're doing? If we're looking at, just take for instance, our city or a county within their public works department or across the whole enterprise, how are we doing in terms of comparables potentially between like-sized cities or like-sized counties or like-sized regional governments? How are we doing? So that's some of the things to think about, and how can we measure that, and how can we improve upon it for the future. And that's really what the foundation questions that were laid out there that starts what's called the GIS Management Institute. And the Management Institute is really what they're looking at putting together is there's a few different components to this. And this is what they'll call the body of knowledge, which will be best practices that are brought from both the research side and the institutional, from universities, as well as the practical case studies from across the country. They'll have that, but there's also a lot of other components to it, and I'll talk specifically about these here in a minute with the capability maturity model and being able to fill out some information online. Professional practice standards, that's another area, and the idea that from the Management Institute, you're going and you're compiling all this information, we want to validate the investment in GIS, and we want to be able to show by putting together this capability maturity model, this management model that the Institute will foster and you'll be able to bring in, for instance, if you're a local government, bring in all your data about your local government, what you're doing in GIS. You can go back and say, here's, this is where we stand, and as we look across like types of cities and counties, and we can validate, yes, this, we put this kind of money into our GIS, and there's where we see deficiencies and where we may be able to put and leverage resources moving forward. This is sort of the kind of idea of why this is put together. So what are the products that are there right now? There's two components that are already existing. There's what's called the geospatial management competency model, and there's also the GIS capability maturity model. And this is so looking at your management resources for any organization, public or private, and also looking at all of the resources, the hardware, the software, and a lot of other questions inside of the capability maturity model for your organization. Is anybody, how many people are familiar with these terms at all? Okay. So these have been released in I don't know what the wisdom was behind it when it was done, but they were released in a PDF type of format to go, and you could go look at these and actually go and take it back to your organization and do some analysis about how are we doing today. That's not really the most sustainable way to handle going and filling something out from a PDF perspective. So where it's moved to is a web-based tool, and I'll talk more about that here in a minute. And then, as I talked about the body of knowledge, that's actually getting built as we speak, and it's probably going to be sometime, because there's a lot of things that they're trying to pull together for the body of knowledge, but that'll be another product that'll happen in the future, probably over the next year or so. The management competency model, if you're not familiar with it, as I mentioned, you've got this PDF, and you can go and actually download it off of URISA's resources page. It gives some information, and I'll just name some of the categories here that you've seen. You're seeing leadership, how are we doing in terms of resource development, in terms of communication, really focused on the management component. So take this back to your organization and go and look at your management tier and go through an analysis. That's what this is supposed to help you do, analysis of how we're currently doing and where we could potentially make some changes and some improvements for the future. So that's the management competency model. Then there's the capability maturity model, and I think it's better just to go from this page because you can actually see some of the different categories. And I think this, to me, when I look at it, it's like, what do I want to know about my organization, and what do I want to know about what I'm doing in GIS? And this is where it kind of breaks it down to the things that, if you didn't have this table of contents, you may not think about on a daily basis. So you see things like, do we have a replacement plan? If we have some sort of issue do we have a catastrophic event or something like that? Do we have a way that, and replacement plan can mean different things for different people, but some ideas about how we could go about replacing our hardware, software, whatever it may be, or resources if it was necessary. What's our technical infrastructure, our enterprise architecture? So you can see these things over here called enabling capabilities that you're filling out. And so this again, as it was released in 2013, this was a PDF that said you could come, that has questions in it, and you can answer those in each of these types of categories. So what's our framework GIS data look like? Do we have a spatial data warehouse? Do we have metadata? You analyze yourself along those different criteria. But I think that the real big, the nice part about this whole thing is you don't necessarily think about these things on a daily basis. It's kind of a strategic plan laid out for you of information that you need to think about. Then there's the execution ability. So new client services evaluation and development. What are we doing in terms of what we're laying out there in terms of applications? Are we capacity building? How are we helping our staff in the development of the skills? Are they getting training opportunities and that sort of thing? Are we sharing GIS data? So you can see there's a lot of different questions here, 55 different categories. Do we have an adequate budget? Is there funding on an annual basis? All these types of things. The idea is, let's go across an organization and look at all of this. And let's have that set up so that people can evaluate themselves. So a GIS manager, for instance, can come in or could delegate to other folks within that organization to fill these things out and give a here's where we are today. Look. The idea is then put that into a software system, which is available now from URISA. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's called the metric survey that was laid out. Let me just go through this first, and I'll go right, because I've got a couple slides on that. When you fill out this thing, when you fill out this maturity model, you get into different levels. So those levels are level 1 through level 5. And this is really where you're saying, hey, here's where I've really getting started type of area, and here's where I'm I'm at the enterprise level, and we've done everything that we could to be the best GIS department we could be. So we've optimized our return on investment. That's talking about the staff execution ability, and then that turns into your ROI. That's where you want, your 5 levels when you're filling out your capability maturity model that you can put yourself in when you're self-analyzing within the tool itself. I mentioned this, the different products. The first one that's been laid out is what's called the metric survey, and that's an online survey. So the metric survey is free, and any organization can sign on and do this. And what it does is it gives some basic information about your GIS organization and some information that can be utilized for those other categories, start those other categories that I mentioned, the 22 and 23 questions on for the capability maturity model. So you lay out, this is who my organization is, how many people, how many staff resources I have, that sort of information, and then you drill down from there. So that's, I think, so far 300 or so organizations has filled out the metric survey from URISA, and I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. It does a self-assessment. It also, as well as the self-assessment, as you're filling that out, you can actually upload documents within the tool, and then there are going to be some reviewers within URISA, some of us 20-year plusers, that will review what you're doing in each of those categories, and it'll give some benchmarks and metrics back about how, some analysis about how, potentially some recommendations about what you could do to take that particular element further, move from that level 1 to a level 5 type of thing. It also will benchmark across, looking at, as I mentioned earlier, like organizations. So a city of 50,000 population, their GIS organization looks like X, compared to the ones that are right next to me that are close to 50,000 population, and what they're doing in their GIS program to Y, as the Y, and then you can look at those together. I want to mention, though, that some folks don't necessarily want to share all of the information about their GIS organization, and you don't have to. It's an opt-in. So if you opt in, then you'll share your data, and then you can look at that across like organizations. As I mentioned, so that's the benchmarking. There's an evaluation against the capability maturity model, and that's what the URISA staff's doing. As you upload this information into the actual maturity model, they'll be doing an evaluation. They'll do that on the management side too for the questions. So as I mentioned, there's the capability maturity model, there's the manager model as well, maturity model. And then what URISA will provide back is a feedback on that. So and then that feedback will have some suggestions in it. And at some point in time, they see this potentially moving. So this is just really kind of a self-assessment, and as well as an add-on from URISA to give you some recommendations back. But they believe that this will take in the future to potentially turn into an accreditation model, so that they're utilizing this type of application to go and accreditate folks in how you're performing GIS within your organizations. That's where they think it might head to. Whether it does or not, I think there's value in what they're doing right now, but being able to provide this online. So there's the core strategy, volunteers that are GIS professionals that will help build this body of knowledge and best practices. There's the existing framework has already been set up. These tools are already out there in a PDF form if you haven't seen them already, to help look at your GIS organization. And then now where it's headed to is to fill out, you can see these are all the different components to the GIS Management Institute, the Book of Knowledge. You already have workshops. These are the ones I'm talking about today, are really this management maturity model as well as a capability maturity model. But these are really all the different components to this whole management institute. The idea here, as you can see, is the ability to look at utilize these maturity models and then be able to come in and do an assessment at the GIS manager level, at the educator level, and potentially doing, as you can see here, the future accreditation. So that's a conceptual diagram of the whole thing. Okay, this is really where I wanted to focus a little bit of time. So I mentioned this. These things were available in PDF format. Now that's a web tool. So in the web tool, you can come online and you can actually fill out some information about. You can set up your own username, password, and that sort of thing. And then you can come in and there's frequently asked questions, but there's different areas. This is the organizational identification area, but the ability to come in here and add some information about your organization and the metrics. Now, as you fill that out, you'll see here that there's going to be, what's the county average in general across you can have this down to the counties within a state or across the country or of like size, and then what the ones that were in the actual benchmark that'll be doing. I think they're picking a certain number of cities and counties and as well as regional governments and state governments to start the beta program for the capability maturity model after they've gone over this metric survey. So the metric survey has been first. It's very basic information to fill out about your organization, get you started. Then what they'll move to next is taking those questions that I had mentioned before. That's going to be a full model it's going into beta next month that you can come online and fill out your information for every single one of those 23 questions, where you feel like you fit within how you're doing in each of those questions. These guys back here, this group, that's what I'm talking about. I know there's a lot of slides. These guys. So that's already going to be. So what URISA has done is instead of having a PDF where you could do this today, you'll have it all on the web. And I think that's a huge deal because you can bring in all this information and you can say, in 2015, as I fill this out, this is how my GIS organization is performing in each of these areas. And I can have an independent evaluator from URISA go in as well, as you can upload documents to say, this is why I feel like we're doing a level 2 in terms of GIS software maintenance. This is our software maintenance program. This is our plan for it. Upload that. What does URISA have to say about this? We believe this is a level 2 or a level 3, but what does URISA say? You'll have the ability to do that. I think that's important because now that I have all this information stored online, you really have an administrative record of your whole department, of your whole GIS organization. You will have put that inside of here, and now I've got, 2015, this is where we stood. Now I can take that information if I opt in, and I can compare that against other organizations of the same size, or similar type of setup. I can do those comparables, and that's really where the next slide here is. Let me just jump here. I can actually do these comparables that show, I know this might be hard to read, but it says, here's my county, here's the county average, and here's the county benchmarks, and that's what the 3 different colors represent. And how am I performing in terms of spatial data warehouse? How am I performing in terms of technical infrastructure? In terms of those different levels that I mentioned, in level 1 to level 5 within my organization. I can take this type of information. This will that's the other part of this, is this will automate some of these reports back on the comparables. So you'll get if you go in and fill this information out, you'll get this report back that gives you these comparables that you can use for presentations to an executive management, for instance, and say, look, here's where we stand today. Here's where other organizations are at. If we could potentially get some additional funding, I can increase how we're performing within the organization. And I think that's a big plus because it's not easy to bring all this type of data together. So URISA is providing a tool that allows us to mesh a lot of information together on all these organizations. I think there's, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, there's 3,000 plus counties. I have no idea how many cities there are out there, but you think about the scale of this thing and the ability to be able to look at that across all of these different these different types of organizations. And it's private companies as well. And it's state organizations. So these are the folks that could be coming in here, and we're already been talking to a few that they'll be in here beta testing this. And I hope that it gets released within Q2, let's say, of this year, so that if folks can start getting in here and bringing this information together. So you've got a placeholder for your administrative record. You can come in the next year and say, 2016, here's how I performed. Now I have an analysis of year by year, or however often you have the ability to update this thing, or pieces of it over time. You can get into it anytime that you want to, and you can show how you're growing your GIS organizations in terms of in terms of your technical resources, in terms of your applications that you're rolling out. So you have a lot of different ways that you can utilize this information. This is just showing some other types of data that you can get out of this as well. I think this is, let me give you a couple of these. How are we doing in terms of and this is really specific stuff, how are we doing in terms of our hydro data in terms of water and our data model. What are we doing in terms of our administrative units for data maintenance? How are we doing performing in transportation data? So you could really break it down into all these different areas, and then do some comparables against this. This one here is actually showing some examples in terms of service quality, project management methodology, quality assurance. It says process event management. So there's a lot of different staff development. Building out our capacity within our organization. So the idea, and then again comparing against their different type of cities and counties and state governments. So that's the idea behind the maturity model. And then hopefully, the idea at the end of the day is that you're going to move up this. What we want to do is, maybe we start out here. This is where we live today, but over time, and utilizing this to track where we're at as a strategic plan moving forward, we move up these levels. That's the whole idea. I look at it as this really gives an organization the feedback and the information they need to see what's going on out in the GIS space in all these different areas, and I can use that to say, look, we need to potentially focus a lot of work in terms of building our training out. What we need to do in terms of building out our technical infrastructure, we're behind in this. This will give us some ideas and some metrics to look at to say, hey, this is. Hopefully, at the end of the day, really what I want to see, would love to see happen is this gives us more GIS resources, more GIS funding within each of our organizations. And this is just another area. That'll come out in terms of we're answering all these questions, but there's just some other additional information. In this case, just to name a few of them, is how we're doing in terms of self-management, human resources, team management, relationship management, so on the management side of things in terms of leadership. So it's the capability maturity model, but it's the management model as well that will be answered within the tool. So it's just this has already been rolled out, so in the near future this has actually already happened. The metrics survey I already mentioned. There's the State of the GIS report. Of those, so as I mentioned, 300 organizations filled out that first metric survey. So URISA is going to provide a State of GIS report just from the metric survey to give some information about, hey, here's 300 organizations and what we can roll up on a very small, little bit of information that we're able to get from them. What does that look like? The Organizational Assessment Service soft launch. It's in beta next month. It'll be in the second quarter. I think it'll be into soft launch at least, and hopefully full launch actually in the second quarter. And then the Organizational Assessment Service, these things are going to come. This is really later in the year, probably in the second quarter we'll be making the announcement, and then there'll be a full URISA journal issued for the Management Institute. So those are the things that are coming up. And these are really, these other ones, this one's going to be the body of knowledge will be worked on continuously for the next few years, and then it's a in perpetuity thing. GIS doesn't die. It's going to happen all into the future. Accreditation, I think that's still to be discussed. I'm not saying that that's going to happen yes or no in terms of accrediting organizations. And then ROI, I think that's really what we're trying to drive to at the end of the day. And I think that's what they want to be able to do is to say, now that we've got all this information in our capabilities maturity model, how do we turn that into looking at performance metrics and return on investment? So I can say our organization is really doing a good job in terms of return on investment. And this is really, I think, a new area within GIS. It's that's picked up in probably the last couple of years, where people are looking at, what's my GIS organization worth? What's the value? And I think I've mentioned most of these already. So I'm going to open it up to any questions that you may have at this time. I guess the big thing is what I've presented up here, does it make sense of what the tool is to do and the process to get there? And any questions you may have.
Any questions? You're all still asleep.
That's fine.
Well, we can certainly get with Alan later in the morning.
Yeah.
If everybody's feeling more awake.
Sure.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Dana, of course.
Yep.
Technical trial investment, this is something we're always asked to do.
Yes.
And it's really difficult to do. Any guidance that you're giving as a manager to say, how much did you spend?
Yep.
Here are ways to look for savings, here are ways to calculate savings. Any help?
There is.
Technical ROI is valuable.
Yeah. There's two, I would mention two areas. There's a 1 day of the 5-day Leadership Academy that is focused on ROI calculations for GIS. There's also a workshop that I know that is just on GIS ROI. So there are things that in the case studies that are happening that are starting to move in that. I'm not the ROI guru. That was really Greg is one of the people that put this together. Greg Babinski. Those are the folks that teach those workshops, and they're starting to figure out, because like you said, a lot of it is it's not quantitative, not easy to quantitatively assess. It's more of a qualitative. That's great. It's GIS is helping me do this and this, but how do I quantify that?
Let me just add something to that. He mentioned Greg Babinski. In addition to what's on the URISA website, if you go to King County, Washington, which is where Greg works, they have a lot of the documentation of the things that they've done there. They've done some really good work in a lot of areas. So they're a role model enterprise GIS systems.
Yeah. But I was going to say that it drives to things like what's the response time on the application? What's how many resources are needed to now versus before when we were able to automate this process? It's those kinds of things that you can, as performance metrics that get to ROI. Yeah?
Is there anybody in the room interested in working with locally? I've started working through it. It's very enlightening from a company perspective. So the value of the GIS program. So I'd love to talk to these guys. Local and 100% discussion about applying to others.
Yeah, for me, I think when you look at it, it's like I said, the table of contents that are there. You don't think about those things every day. So you go to your organization, and go, we really need to put some thought behind this particular area, and put some resources on it.
Really great to come up with goals.
Yeah.
Working for the next year.
Maybe it's be a good thing for Carolina URISA to take on.
There you go.
Carolina URISA leadership there asking questions. So.
There you go. Yeah.
Kind of reference to what Ron said. I used to think sitting down in a room with peers that doing it together. When you're on something like what does that mean? How do you translate that to everything on that?
Yeah.
That's exactly, I've been working on this with a couple other folks, and that's exactly what happens. It becomes a platform for having a discussion, saying, well, I'm not doing very well in this area, what are you doing in that? I'm doing this. It's a great way to have a common platform for discussion.
Excellent.
Great. Good comments. Thank you, guys.
All right. Very
We'll
good.
switch it over for
Yeah.
us.
I'll fix this thing.
Okay.
Our second speaker, for those of you who